What's up everyone, this is Oslin coming in with another video for the newest dungeon in Season 2 of The War Within, Operation Floodgate. This guide is going to focus on mechanics, since the routing might change closer to release. Before we get started, don't forget to tap that like and subscribe button to stay in the loop on future content. Your main objective is to find the 5 weapon stockpiles placed throughout the dungeon. This will open up the wall that barricades the boss at the end of the dungeon. Coming down the stairs will be the Shrednator 3000. These enemies have 2 major abilities. The first will be Shredation Sawblade. These will drop several spinning saw blades on top of players, inflicting significant physical damage with the potential to one-shot them on contact. And no, I'm not trolling. This is a legitimate mechanic that requires strong reaction time and utilization of defensives. Contractors have Wrench Wallop that will wallop a player for heavy physical damage. Surveyors toss Dynamite for strong fire damage, and they'll also target a player with Surveying Beam. This will channel pools of fire beneath a player, and it needs to be interrupted. Architects will perch themselves on top of a scaffolding, then start picking off players one by one with their nail gun. Ranged players can still target the Architect, but melee will need to destroy the scaffolding to bring them down. Loader bots have an ability called Wind Up. This is a channeled whirlwind that slows their movement speed, hitting any nearby player up to 3 times per second. These can be stunned to break the effect. Snipers, as their name suggests, is a CC, use your defensives, and don't take a snipe at low health mechanic. On normal, these hit their target for over a 500,000 health per snipe. Trickshot will fire at half this damage, but ricochets off all players in the party for that amount per person. This must be interrupted, so don't take on too many snipers in one go. Demolitionists will cast RPGG, then reload, and yes, there is an extra G. Each RPGG that is fired will paint the ground in a large red circle, then strike all players caught in the blast radius. Reload isn't interruptible, but it is stunnable. What's more, if you stun it while they're reloading, it will force them to reload again, preventing an additional RPGG. For tanks and healers, the soldiers will only attack with melee, but these melee attacks have a chance to apply a stacking debuff that inflicts additional shadow damage every 2 seconds for 20 seconds. This debuff is magic, so it can be dispelled. Blood Warpers have high health and will hit the entire party with Warp Blood in a 60-yard radius. This inflicts high shadow damage to all players and also applies a healing absorb. This is a channel mechanic that lasts for 6 seconds. Their standard ability is Blood Bolt, which will easily one-shot your tank or any player it hits if not interrupted. Much like this example here from a tank that didn't disrupt. The first boss of this dungeon is Big Mama. This is a 2-phase encounter. Your priority in Phase 1 should be the Mecha Drones, not Big Mama. I'll get to this in a moment. The Mecha Drones aren't problematic if they're managed effectively. These will shoot random players for moderate physical damage, then eventually overload for a massive AoE knockback. This needs to be interrupted, or it will likely one-shot your non-tank players. The third ability is Doomstorm. This will mark small blue circles on the ground and then charge in a straight line for significant nature damage from any player caught in its path. Once the Mecha Drones have been defeated, Big Mama will cast Jumpstart. This is where you want to blow all your cooldowns, cast Heroism, and drop group-wide defensives. Big Mama will take an additional 200% increased damage, but pulses heavy nature damage to all players every 1.5 seconds for 12 seconds. This also leaves behind excessive electrification on the ground, then respawns the Mecha Drones. Tanks will want to pull the boss out of the electrified ground. Secondary abilities to be aware of, we have Sonic Boom. This will blast significant sonic damage every 0.5 seconds, pushing players back, silencing them in the process, then exploding on contact. The initial projection will follow the player, so give the boss plenty of room, don't point it at your other party members, then move out of the pathing. Lastly, we have the Tank Buster. This will be Electro Crush, which makes Edna's Smash hit like a feather. This will truck your tank for a significant amount of nature damage, then apply a 10-second bleed. This hurts. Once the first boss has been defeated, you'll cross the swamp. Tanks will need to be cautious when fighting within the water, as these circles will spawn waves of swirlies that will follow and bombard the targeted player. Climbing up the stairs, you'll find 2 Shrednators. Despite their proximity to one another, these can and should be pulled separately so to not overlap the saw blades or flamethrowers. The second boss is the Demolition Dill, and much like the speakers in the Stone Vault, these need to be defeated together. Keza won't budge when the tank moves, but Bront is very tankable, so assume to always be tanking on top of Keza. Bront will come running over. Keza's first ability is BBBFG. This will paint the ground in a number of straight lines that will deal significant fire damage to players caught in the blast. She'll also fire at random targets with Quickshot for heavy physical damage. This will lead into her main ability, Big Bada Boom. This mechanic is similar to Siege of Borealis, in which Bront will aim himself to charge at a random player. The targeted player needs to quickly position themselves behind a bomb, then move out of the way when Bront starts running. Unlike Siege, players won't be able to prevent bombs from exploding if a player doesn't position themselves correctly. They can only be cleared by Bront, and should they go off, it will hit the entire party with deflagration, inflicting heavy fire damage to all players with a 10-second burn over time. This affects stacks for each bomb that goes off. When Bront hits the bomb, it will instead trigger shrapnel. This will knock the bomb into the air, then paint a number of impact zones on the ground that need to be avoided. Bront's charge has a heavy physical hit should the player not move out of the way in time. It will also stun that player for 2 seconds. The tank buster here is Wallop. It's not a big tank buster, but it's worth noting that players will want to range 5 the tank and give them a bit of distance before it triggers to avoid an aerial knockup with a 500,000 damage modifier. Again, these two need to be defeated together, as this will increase the other's damage dealt by 20%, stacking every 4 seconds. Bront will also repeatedly start casting Wallop, which can be especially hard on melee. Once you've triggered the last weapon stockpile behind the demolition duo, it's just a short walk over to the third boss. Bombshell crabs will detonate when they die, and the disturbed kelps will cast Jettison Kelp. This is a whirlwind that can be stunned to break the effect. Swampface will spawn by the barricaded door I marked in green on the map earlier. The encounter is relatively straightforward, but the bombardment zones can make it a little bit tricky. If you move Swampface over towards the nearby rubble, it should make it easier to focus on your target, and not so much the environment. Swampface only has 4 notable mechanics. Awaken the Swamp will cause Swampface to smash the ground repeatedly for 4 seconds. This will inflict pulsing nature damage to all players. This will also paint medium-sized impact areas on the ground that will erupt for significant nature damage to players caught in the blast. Each time Swampface hits the ground, it'll unleash large waves of water that inflict significant frost damage for every second that a player is caught within it, dragging them in the direction the wave is traveling. Mudslide is a large frontal that will one-shot non-tank players, so be sure to sidestep it, and Sludge Claws is his tank buster. This can be fatal if not mitigated, and also applies a hefty healing absorb. The Mythic mechanic in this encounter is Razor Choke Vines. This will tether 2 players together for 24 seconds, inflicting moderate nature damage in the process. Players will want to coordinate which way they intend to move to dodge the important mechanics, as the vines will pull players back together if they separate too far from one another. Unlike other tethers that players may be familiar with, these vines cannot be broken. Once inside, you'll encounter Bubbles. This is a mini-boss that will generously clear the bridge in front of you. You may not want to fight it directly on the bridge, as you need to give other players room to maneuver through the bubbles caused by Bubble Burp and dodge the Splish Splash frontal cone. Tanks in classes like Paladins and Hunters can also clear these bubbles to maintain floor space. Bubbles also targets players with Backwash, spitting at players for a moderate amount of frost damage and leaving behind a dot that lasts for 10 seconds. Notable trash in this area, we have the Inspectors. These will cast Surprise Inspection, teleporting behind a player and then aiming at them with a frontal cone, similar to the Eye of the Queen encounters from the City of Threads. Electricians also have a hefty lightning bolt that will dominate your party if not interrupted. Tanks will want to tag these in smaller numbers if interrupts are not well coordinated. Lastly, we have the Dark Fuse Jumpstarters. These high health minions have a tank buster called Spark Slam, and will spawn a deadly dance party for all players for as long as they remain alive. The final boss of this dungeon is Gizel Gigazap. Turbocharge is a defensive/healer intensive in which he will draw energy from the generator, dealing pulsing nature damage to all players every second for 10 seconds. At the same time, he'll emit beams of electricity that can one-shot non-tank players. These need to be avoided. The dam will then begin to collapse as players need to dodge the rubble falling from the ceiling. This will inflict heavy physical damage within a 3-yard radius of the impact zone. Gizel's tank buster here is Thunder Punch. Tanks need to be careful not to take this with their back facing the edge of the platform, as this will instantly KO them should they fall off. On Mythic difficulty, Giesel will cast Leaping Sparks, which will spawn a number of sparks that fixate on players. Each player will need to find a water zone on the ground triggered from the collapsing dam, and lure the spark into the puddle. This will turn the dam water into shock water, so position yourself similarly as you did the bombs on the Demolition Duo, and don't stand in the puddles. Lastly, for healers, Gigap will target a non-tank player for a hefty amount of nature damage, then leave behind an 8-second dot. You'll want to focus on these players for that duration. Only one spark can be used per pool, so you'll need to coordinate these respectively. And that's it for our guide on mechanics to the Operation Floodgate dungeon. Could I have played this better? Absolutely, but hey, the content is new and I'm doing this without alerts, timers, or other essentials. But let's hear your thoughts on the newest dungeon in the comments below. Those looking for a route, hit that like and subscribe button because I'll be pushing out a route guide after the release on the retail servers. Until next time.